Eclipse is a pretty famous book. Most fans know what you're talking about if you say The New Prophecy or A Vision of Shadows, but far fewer could tell you the contents of Twilight or River of Fire with any specificity. Defining in our memories which events correspond to which book can be difficult, and given that the arcs are meant to be complete stories when put together, it makes sense. Eclipse, though, is a bit of an exception, as its title conjures images of its most famous scene, and the politics and core characters that preceded and succeeded it. It might be a bit of a surprise, then, to know that I have trouble with the structure of this book, as so much of what people might be picturing as the Eclipse conflict actually bleeds over into and is genuinely concluded in the next book instead. But that's exactly the reason why this series examines one book at a time, to show what was and wasn't included in the space of each entry, and where our memories may be faulty. Eclipse was released on September 2nd, 2008, about 4 months after Outcast and Warrior's Return, about 2 months after Cats of the Clans and the Rise of Scourge, and the same day as another manga that I will cover in the next episode. It's probably obvious from that summary alone that the number of books has rapidly increased lately, with the inclusion of simultaneous mangas along with the 2 guidebooks, and prior to that, the first Super Edition. The authors and, in some cases, illustrators have been switching around quite a bit, with this entry being written by Kate Carey again, but they are still trying to work on a cohesive world, with several separate cohesive stories. Whether or not the Aarons, Vicky in particular, given she was conceiving all of this, were stretching themselves too thin is yet to be determined, but it's a fair point to make now as we enter the second half of the Power of Three arc. With the first 3 books covering so little overarching plot, and the promises made to cover the Three's powers, the fulfillment of the prophecy, Tiger Star and Hawkfrost's training of Lionpaw in the Dark Forest, and the protagonists simply completing their training and getting their names, which they haven't yet, these next 3 books have an awful lot to do, and not much time, or perhaps focus, in which to do it. Before we get into it, though, let's first do a check-in with our allegiances. Stormfur and Brook have returned to the mountains, but with Berrynose, Hazeltail, and Mousewhisker becoming warriors, there are now 16 warriors again instead of 15. And while they have left the apprentice den, Foxpaw and Icepaw have come in, so there are 8 apprentices instead of 9. Things in the nursery haven't changed except for Ferncloud's Kit's leaving, and the Elder's Den is also consistent. The only other notable thing in the allegiances is that there is a new cat listed outside of the clans, a long-haired, brown and tortoiseshell Tom named Soul. I wonder how he will come into play in this book. Anyway, there's a speaking cast of 73 cats this time around, a few less than Dark River and Outcast, but still more than the site, and the top 10% of that cast has 69% of the lines, still more than Outcast, but less than Dark River and the site. As far as the she-cat percentage, 51% of the cast is she-cats this time, the first time in the arc that it has tipped over 50%. And that 51% has 42% of the lines, which is less than Dark River in the site, but still greater than Outcast. That was just not a good book for she-cats. Now that we have that out of the way, though, let's take a gander at the plot. The prologue takes place in StarClan, with Yellowfang, Spotted Leaf, White Storm, and Blue Star hanging out and discussing the prophecy, including an apparent deception of the 3 apprentices involved. They say it wasn't them who lied in the first place, but are still split on what to do until they just walk away rather than continue to argue. Left alone with Spotted Leaf again, Yellowfang says that a darkness is coming that StarClan can't prevent, or even protect themselves from. Okay, I'll bite. Let's see what tremendous threat is coming. Back in the living world, our protagonists are still in the mountains, just outside of the tribe's territory, and we've apparently skipped over the scene where Jaypaw told his siblings about the prophecy. Stormfur and Brook are staying behind in the mountains, and Hollypaw and Lionpaw are busy contemplating their powers. Hollypaw wonders if she could fly, or how much power they could have, and Lionpaw seems dismissive of the idea, saying that they need to live in the real world. While debating whether or not they're capable of anything, and whether or not they still need to protect the clan and follow the code, Jaypaw cuts in to say that they shouldn't be talking about it because, assuming other cats believed it, they wouldn't like it and might be scared of them. While hunting and being upset about Breezepaw, they figure out that Jaypaw can probably see things others can't, and Lionpaw is, somehow really strong or unstoppable or something in battle? It's a little nebulous. A somewhat infamous scene occurs where Breezepaw catches and is praised for catching a very fat rabbit, and Crowfeather instead chooses to comment on Lionpaw's pigeon. The reasons behind this and potential justifications or morality of this action are so mangled at this point, especially since we never got either character's point of view, so all I can definitively say is that Breezepaw's anger is obvious. What Crowfeather was thinking or feeling is entirely up to interpretation. Although the interpretation is definitely being pushed in a specific direction, as Jaypaw, Lionpaw, and Hollypaw, all at different points, have expressed or will express disdain at Crowfeather's style of parenting, with less overt warmth than Brambleclaw. Back at the Lake Territories, Lionpaw is woken up for training by his mentor, Ashfur, who has promised that they would go hunting with Whitewing and Icepaw. Lionpaw had a great dream, and is annoyed by how curtly Ashfur talks to him, along with how little his mentor listens to his ideas. Ashfur seems very considerate about helping Icepaw learn, and helping Whitepaw learn how to teach her, but doesn't afford the same consideration to his own apprentice for whatever reason. After getting some serious praise from Icepaw, Lionpaw goes to speak with Hollypaw about how odd and isolating it is to be part of the prophecy. Lionpaw also contemplates how knowing he's the most special cat ever might make it easier for Jaypaw to do boring chores. Despite all of this, life goes on mundanely as usual, and Lionpaw laments how there's no point to being special if no cat knows. Side note, though, there are several cute background character moments going on here that Lionpaw does not care about, like Icepaw giving her first catch to Longtail and Mousefur, and Foxpaw deciding he wants to be called Foxcatcher as a warrior. Another fun famous scene happens here, where the apprentices gather to share some leftover honey Leafpool found, and Lionpaw, and Hollypaw soon after, brood about how they cannot indulge in such simple pleasures, but one day, all the honey will be Lionpaw's because he is very, very special. I cannot tell if we were meant to take this seriously, but it is extremely funny. Tigerstar and Hawkfrost berate him in his dreams for not showing up while he was away in the mountains, and generally seem to be less than thrilled with his accomplishments, and unconvinced by his new prophecy, taking credit for his prowess themselves rather than saying he has any special power. After breaking down his certainty in the prophecy being about him, they demand that he keep training with them. Back in the waking world, there are actually a lot of cute moments going on, and next up is Toadkit playing with Jayfeather's tail and being scared to get stingy medicine on his nettle pricks. Also, and for no particular reason, Leafpool mentions that she doesn't keep deathberries in the store like ShadowClan does. Anyway, Cloudtail then comes to ask if Cinderpaw is ready for her assessment, or if she should wait until her leg is stronger. But with how downtrodden Cinderpaw is at being injured, and, by her judgment, useless in the medicine den, Leafpool assures Cloudtail that she's good to go. While out with a hunting patrol the next day, though not hunting himself, Jaypaw finds his stick again and thinks about the ancients and their potential connections to the tribe and maybe even clans. Also, it seems like WingClan has recently crossed the border against Firestar's warning. Cinderpaw's assessment is the next day, which Jaypaw is worried about, and Hollypaw wishes she could watch. They and Lionpaw end up deciding to follow her in secret so they can see how she does, which leads to another semi-comical scene as Lionpaw and Hollypaw narrate what Cinderpaw is doing to Jaypaw, until, well, let's say Jaypaw's worry was proven to be valid as Cinderpaw's leg gave out on her during a pounce, and she's quickly brought back to Leafpool and Jaypaw. Cinderpaw is more frustrated than ever, and Leafpool is being stubborn about her initial judgment, even as Jaypaw pushes against it, because, as he says, she is obsessed with the past, and has to accept that she can't always make things instantly right. Abruptly cutting off that conversation before it finishes, we skip to the next morning with Hollypaw, as she visits a miserable Cinderpaw and witnesses Poppypaw and Honeypaw get their warrior names without her, becoming Poppyfrost and Honeyfern. The latter is still mooning over Berrynose, even more so now that they're both warriors. Hollypaw is also called with Brambleclaw, Sandstorm, and Brackenfur to speak with Firestar about the WingClan scents found on their side of the border, along with the evidence of killed prey. Firestar asks them to go to One Star and get his side of the story, which they do. They have to go almost right up to the camp before they scent any cats or prey, and they meet a cold reception when they arrive. Despite their plea to just talk, Hairspring, Ashfoot, and then One Star all demand that they go home empty-pawed. Brackenfur guesses that they might be low on prey themselves, which Hollypaw privately agrees with, but she believes that it couldn't give them a right to steal prey. When she reports this to Lionpaw, he seems excited at the prospect of a battle, while Hollypaw just wants them to keep to their own territory and finds his overt aggression disturbing, briefly wondering if any cat could stop her powerful brother if he decided to fight over the smallest things. Following another harsh training session with Tigerstar and Hawkfrost, Lionpaw wakes up with blood in his nest as he was hurt in the real world as well, which is worrying. Lionpaw and Hollypaw later find more prey remains on their side of WingClan's border, and Hollypaw is distressed that they would eat prey instead of taking it back to the Elders. Hollypaw also finds a fox den that leads to the tunnels, and hides it from Lionpaw, which Lionpaw assumes is because she's scared of him starting to see Heatherpaw again. Back in camp, everyone is also getting pretty angry about One Star and WingClan's invasions, but Jaypaw's attention is called away by Cinderpaw, who is unwilling to do much of anything on her own anymore out of a fear that she won't be able to get better. This thrusts Jaypaw into Cinderpelt's memory in Cinderpaw's head, and prompts Leafpool to again comment on how Cinderpaw doesn't know and can't know about her past life, spoiling Cinderpaw rather than pushing her to get better. Jaypaw complains that Leafpool is obsessed with the Cinderpelt in Cinderpaw, and Leafpool proves he's right by thinking in that moment about her guilt over her mentor's death. This guilt is causing her enough uncertainty that she's unwilling to do anything to help Cinderpaw heal, which is making her worse. Jaypaw, angered by Leafpool's actions, stomps out of camp and down to the lake, where he finds his stick has been carried off into the lake. Firestar, who happens by, rescues the stick for him and, thankfully for Jaypaw, asks almost no questions about why Jaypaw was so desperate to have this particular stick and keep it here rather than in camp. When he gets back, though, the floating wood and thinking about his own terrifying experiences with water gives him the idea to potentially use this for Cinderpaw's treatment. He's going to teach Cinderpaw to swim, as a way to strengthen her leg without having to walk on it. The next morning, he sneaks her out of camp, and, feeling a little more determined, as she now has an avenue to heal, Cinderpaw starts to return to her old energetic self as she goes down to the lake and starts to haphazardly swim in the water. Leafpool catches them, but by that point they have proven Jaypaw's technique to be working, and Cinderpaw would like to do it again. At the Medicine Cat gathering, it sounds like Little Cloud has someone in mind to be his apprentice, and Willowpaw gets her full name, Willowshine, before everyone goes to sleep. Jaypaw accidentally intrudes on Little Cloud's dream and hears that Blackstar has been distracted, allowing Russetford to organize all the patrols as he is losing faith. Running Nose tells Little Cloud to help him restore his faith, and Jaypaw wakes up, annoyed that he got nothing useful from this meeting. Hollypaw has a bad dream about Lionpaw sneaking up on her from the tunnels, and is awoken for the pre-dawn patrol to Winklin's border. While out, she spots what she thinks is a lion, but considering she mistook her brother for a fox in her dream, her recognition of animals might not be entirely accurate right now. Also, when Hollypaw later chats with Cinderpaw, it seems that she's too burdened by how important she is and how much responsibility she has when compared to her friend. Leafpool and Jaypaw help Millie have her kits, 2 she-cats and a tom, named Briarkit, Blossomkit, and Bumblekit. Also, it seems that some cats are still annoyed with Millie for keeping her kitty pet name, and Spiderleg is annoyed with his kits for being kits. Amidst all this, Jaypaw suddenly gets a vision of some sort of cold, pressing, all-encompassing darkness, and a strange tom enters camp. His name is Soul, and he seems very calm and knowledgeable in the clans, despite being a stranger to them. Thornclaw doesn't know why he escorted the tom into camp, and both Jaypaw and Leafpool sense the power he wields, at least in his words, so they follow him into the forest. There, he tells them that a great emptiness is coming and the sun will go out, which Starklin didn't tell Leafpool, but which Jaypaw recognizes from his vision. Soul is escorted out of camp, and Jaypaw hopes that he is wrong. That night, WindClan attacks ThunderClan in their camp, and One Star says that it is because they are true warriors, fighting for the prey and territory they need and standing up to ThunderClan, who apparently believes they are the most important clan around the lake. With an initial skirmish over, WindClan flees, and ThunderClan breaks into patrols to follow them into the forest. It turns out WindClan used the tunnels to get here, and Firestar gets his patrol, including Lionpaw, to start blocking one of the entrances so they can't use it again. As they are working, a WindClan patrol attacks. Hollypaw's patrol is doing well for a while, but are overwhelmed as more warriors come, and Brambleclaw orders Hollypaw to go to Blackstar for help, which she does with some reluctance. Tawnypelt takes her to him, and with Russet first prodding, Blackstar agrees to assist, so with the extra help of ShadowClan, Hollypaw launches back into the fight. Back in camp, the Queens, Elders, and Cinderpaw are all preparing to fight despite their differing weaknesses, and Jaypaw decides to go out into the territory to bring injured cats back to the Hollow, which Leafpool reluctantly allows after several requests. Jaypaw is also told by Greystripe to warn Firestar about RiverClan having joined the fight on WindClan's side. All 4 clans are now fighting on ThunderClan's territory. Lionpaw is doing really well in the battle and takes RiverClan's arrival as a new challenge to race off and deal with, but Firestar appears ready to consider retreat. Lionpaw is stopped from beating a trembling Mosspelt by Firestar, who says she knew she was beaten and he didn't need to keep pushing, leading Lionpaw to briefly regret his wild anger. He seems ready to keep fighting on his own, though, while his allies are bleeding, and then he sees Heatherpaw. Convinced that she told her clan about the tunnels and brought danger to his clan, he attacks her, but she says Sedgekit was the one who told WindClan instead. Lionpaw doesn't believe her, though, and declares she will be his enemy forever before he lets her run. Crowfeather comes to check on his apprentice, and Lionpaw, still filled with anger, nearly kills him, horrifying both WindClan cats just as the sun goes out above their heads. Everyone is terrified by the sudden dusk-like light in the middle of the day, and the fighting stops. But the sun does eventually return, and the medicine cats are left to check every cat's wounds while the clan wonders what happened. While they're checking, Squirrelflight collapses, and it turns out she was hiding a long, deep wound across her belly. All of her family crowds around her worriedly, but once the medicine cats have done their job, it's in StarClan's paws. The clan discusses how the battle was neither won nor lost, and while Lionpaw seems perfectly happy to keep fighting, the rest of the clan is battered and unwilling to face another fight so soon. Jaypaw then tells Lionpaw about Soul's message and its connection to the day's events, leading them and Hollypaw to seek Soul out and find out more about the prophecy that even StarClan doesn't know. They find him in an abandoned two-leg nest, and, using leading questions and a calm, hypnotic voice, Soul presents himself as a wise figure who knows more about the prophecy than they do. He says that the power is theirs to control, rather than StarClan's or the warrior codes, which knocks Hollypaw off her paws, as she can't imagine what would happen if she was more powerful than the code. The three ask Soul to live just outside their territory so they can keep talking to him and getting advice, which he agrees to. However, on the way back, they run into a ShadowClan patrol, and Soul decides to stay with them and Blackstar instead, instantly breaking the three's trust as soon as he got it. Yellowfang then comes to Jaypaw in his dreams with some other StarClan cats and says that he needs to serve the clan without asking too many questions, because all will eventually be revealed, which does absolutely nothing to calm him. Back in camp, normal things are happening, but also it seems like Millie is developing a cough? That's not great. Squirrelflight is doing better, though, in that she's healing, but definitely not all better yet. Lionpaw is also visited by Tigerstar in his dreams, without Hawkfrost, and when Lionpaw says he might not need Tigerstar's training anymore, the Dark Tabby furiously attacks and holds Lionpaw down as he wakes up. A gathering is happening that night, and Millie has white cough, but it's okay because Jaypaw can still come. WindClan comes as well, eventually, and it is actually ShadowClan who seems to be missing until Blackstar comes in, alone, with no one but Soul, and declares that ShadowClan won't attend any more gatherings. Soul knows more than StarClan, and Blackstar has long since lost faith in the strength or accuracy of his ancestors, so he is going to avoid following their lead now. Jaypaw talks to Yellowfang and finds out StarClan can't do anything about it, so by his account, it's time for the three to fulfill their destiny. Lionpaw has a nightmare about killing Heatherpaw and feels horrified about how violent he has become. But after a couple of quick clan scenes and a discussion of what they can, or rather can't, do about Soul and ShadowClan, we are ready to end the book off on a high note as Hollypaw, Lionpaw, and Cinderpaw are made warriors. Hollyleaf, Lionblaze, and Cinderheart. This is a dense book, and I think it is arguably the best one in the arc. There are various funny, heartwarming, and telling moments to distinguish each of the characters and their relationships to each other. I could easily argue that, even more than the site, this book is one of the best in the series for just showing off a unique and interesting cast of characters who I would happily watch just living their lives and chatting. In addition, this is one of the biggest moments I would point to in saying how important it is that Jaypaw be a medicine cat. I don't agree with Spotted Leaf and Leafpool's initial reasons for forcing him into the position, but his dealings with Cinderpaw in this book show him to be one of the most passionate, innovative, and effectual medicine cats that the clans have ever had. And it is amazing that he doesn't get his own name at the end of the book, along with his siblings. If I were to write this series myself, I would use this as one of the main reasons for Jaypaw to realize that he does want to be a medicine cat when given the choice. Lionpaw, or Lionblaze now, is also given pretty good material in this book, as an overly dramatic little boy dealing with his newfound importance, and also a cat with intense anger issues and an inability to be beaten that leads him to being cocky and violent in ways that scare his sister, his enemies, and later, even himself. Definitely some rich stuff to chew on emotionally in helping him develop. Hollypaw, now Hollyleaf, really isn't a focus for this one, which is unfortunate, as she's the only main character we still don't have a definitive power or journey set for. She muses about how WindClan's attack and, briefly, Soul's corruption of ShadowClan compare to the Warrior Code, but she's definitely more sidelined than either of her brothers. One cat who does get a lot of focus, though, is Cinderpaw, now Cinderheart. She has a genuinely compelling journey towards realizing her own strength again and finding a way to move past her injury without hurting herself further or wasting away in the medicine den. However, while a lot of her journey is told through Jaypaw's choices as a medicine cat, a lot more of it is told through the lens of her reincarnation and Leafpool's feelings about it. Cinderheart carries Cinderpelt's memories in her head, enough for Jaypaw to think they are in her conscious brain, She has impulses to protect Kits based on Cinderpelt's last memories being of dying to protect Kits, and she is able to help out with wounds after the big battle. Not because she learned anything in the medicine den, but because of intuition based on Cinderpelt's knowledge. I already said my piece about the Cinderpelt reincarnation stuff, though, twice now, so I'll let it be. On a new note, One Star has certainly changed since his reluctant strength in the new prophecy, but I wouldn't truly call it badly handled at this point in time, because Firestar's attempts to reach out to him and One Star shutting him down for thinking his clan is the most important feels like a natural progression if One Star's aim is looking strong and independent to his clanmates, half of whom participated in a coup against him. We don't see much of that development since we aren't in WinClan, and I think some of it could have been made more explicit in the Firestar and One Star dialogue we got, but at this point, I still consider him to be a good, albeit tragic, character. One truly odd thing in this book is the pacing, however. The first 3 chapters essentially wrap up the tribe plot from the last book. Chapter 5 is our first hint of there being problems at WinClan's border. Chapter 9 is the first hint that Blackstar may be losing his faith, and we briefly meet Sol in late Chapter 11. And then 4 chapters, 12 through 16, are spent on what comes to be known as the Eclipse battle, because of the book it is in and the event that ends it. Even after that, though, it isn't until chapter 20 that our protagonists meet Sol again, and as soon as they talk to him and are enthralled enough to invite him back as their mentors, Sol willingly, in clear view of them, chooses to stay with ShadowClan instead, because maybe it's a more valuable option to him? There was no need for Hollypaw, Jaypaw, and Lionpaw to follow him to ShadowClan's camp and see him abandon them for Blackstar. Sol willingly doing this in front of the very powerful and trusting young cats that he only just got the trust of makes him look stupid, which is the opposite of what he should be as a master manipulator archetype. Of course, I already covered a lot of this in my video dedicated to Sol, but now that it is coming up in the timeline, it feels especially important to point out how quickly his potential was ruined. And then, 3 chapters later, we see Sol again, having effectively taken over ShadowClan and corrupted Blackstar away from StarClan before the book ends. Whatever Sol is doing will have to bleed into the next book, which feels a little odd given how much time it took us to get to the point of Sol being a threat or even a presence at all. Sol's existence as a threat lasted only 4 chapters at the end of this book, despite Eclipse being known for him, and his lack of presence in the narrative or effect on anything before the final chapters renders him feeling more like an odd, rushed side character than a primary villain. Piling on the sickness happening with Millie, WinClan's feud with ThunderClan, the training Lionpaw is doing in his dreams, Squirrelflight's injury being healed, Hollypaw's entire arc and power, and Jaypaw getting his name are all at least touched on, but not remotely resolved by the end of this book, can make it feel like this book, and whatever comes next, will be more of a 2-parter, rather than either entry being able to stand on its own. Eclipse is, as I said earlier, a dense book with a lot of different plot and character beats for our main cast and characters all across the clans. But throwing so many disconnected elements together without enough time for all of them, or connections between them, can leave the book feeling a little disjointed as well, especially when examined in isolation without the preceding or succeeding books. But with 2 books left to go, we'll just have to see if Sol is capable of rising to be the antagonist this arc really needs when we return to the main series in a future episode of our trip through time.